Well, Mr. Forbes, thank you so much for joining us here on Newsmax TV.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
Well, the Federal Reserve in San Francisco recently forecast a bear market through 2020 and equity values not rising significantly until 2030. Do you think that this is for real, or is this just doomsday kind of thinking?
It's what you would call rear view mirror investing, taking the recent past and extrapolating it into the future. I'm sure the ancestors of the San Francisco Fed probably did the same thing in 1980, when you could have painted a very equally bleak picture of the U.S. economy. The U.S. economy, I think reforms are starting to be made because we have divided government in Washington. You can't make as much progress as we'd like, but I think after the 2012 elections, there'll be significant reforms such as we saw in the early 1980s. And I think what you're seeing in some of the states, such as New Jersey, where even with a divided government, the Democrat legislature approved a budget that was less than the year before. And in New York, with a Democrat governor, you got a budget coming in at spending less than the year before. So the country realizes it cannot continue on its current course.
Polls show that President Obama's approval ratings continue to hit new lows. He says that he inherited this mess from the Bush administration. Do you buy that argument?
Well, every president inherits what went on before, but I don't remember Abraham Lincoln whining that James Buchanan left him a great big mess when he took office in March of 1861. You're supposed to deal with it. You voluntarily took the job on. And I think the evidence is very clear that the president's policies has made the situation worse, not better. The blowout in spending. Where does the money come from? It comes from the taxpayers one way or the other, through borrowing, taxing, or printing money, which is another form of taxation. Obamacare, he passed that. Dodd-Frank, he pushed that. The weakening of the dollar, it started under the previous administration, but he's made it much worse. So whether it's the dollar spending, refusing to do serious things in reforming the tax code, refusing to do serious things on reforming entitlements, that ball very much is in his court.
How can President Obama and Congress jumpstart the economy?
Well, the president has to be serious about negotiating. He says he wants a deal, but it's always on his term, his way or the highway. And in terms of what he could do right away to help the economy is stop trashing the U.S. dollar and make the dollar as good as gold. That would go a long ways to re-attracting private foreign capital, which is now leaving this country. He can stop the binge spending. He started it. He can stop it. So there are a lot of things he could do, but I don't think he's going to do them.
The president has recently appointed Alan Krueger to direct the White House Council of Economic Advisors. What do you make of this appointment?
Well, for the most part, Dr. Krueger is very much on the same song sheet as President Obama. They both believe in the value-added tax, both believe in higher minimum wage, which destroys jobs, and so they should get along very nicely.
The Obama administration reportedly supports a plan that would refinance existing underwater Fannie-Freddie loans, with new mortgages at a rate as low as 4%. Is there any reason to think a plan like this would be more effective than the fiscal stimulus, or do anything positive at all for the economy?
The government should keep in mind what physicians, doctors are taught. First, don't harm the patient. And in this case, they are harming the housing market. The housing market would have cleared by now. People would have started buying again, but instead they've clogged the arteries. And so, yes, with the kind of what you get on mortgages today are not many new mortgages. Those applications are down. What you're getting is refinancing of existing mortgages. And there are a lot of people out there who should never have bought a house. Clear the decks, let them start putting their lives back together again, and stop pretending that they can afford what they can't afford. We need 1.5 million new houses a year in a normal economy because of wear and tear and population increase. So if the administration would let the markets clear, you would start to see in a couple of years these inventories would be going through. People know there are a lot of bargains out there, and you would see home building begin to pick up seriously again.
The Congressional Budget Office is predicting that unemployment will stay at well above 8% until 2014. And President Obama is poised to release his jobs plan, which is expected to propose extending current payroll tax cuts and jobless benefits, spending money for new construction projects, and incentives to hire more workers. Does this sound like another gimmick to you, or can this send the economy to new heights?
What you see here is the definition of insanity. Something does not work, you keep trying it and hoping that somehow it will work. Doing more government spending, doing more stimulus under another name is not going to help get this economy back on track again, because again, the government is in the driver's seat. In terms of extending unemployment benefits, that should only be made on the case of hardship. It does not stimulate the economy. The payroll tax, because it's temporary, does not encourage real spending and investment and the creation of new resources. So that is going to have minimal impact. And then a jobs creation through a new infrastructure bank, all that is Fannie Mae for highways. We saw where that led. This would lead to a crash up in the same way. So bottom line, more of the same. He doesn't get it, which is why he'll be a one-term president.
Mr. Forbes, you have criticized the Federal Reserve's policies, which you say devalue the U.S. dollar and hurt private investment here in the U.S. Can you explain to our viewers how the Federal Reserve is doing this?
Well, the Federal Reserve creates excess money. It's like putting extra fuel in a car. All you do is flood the engine. What the Fed does not realize, and what most people in Washington don't realize, is that government doesn't create money. People, in effect, create money doing transactions with one another. It replaces barter. But it's not pieces of paper that do it. It's exchanging products and services. And the nice thing about money, when it has a steady value, is that you choose what you get in exchange. You give me an orange, and I may only have apples. You may not want apples. You may want to buy a pear, which in the case of money you can very easily do. So it facilitates transactions. So when the Federal Reserve starts to pump out more pieces of paper, in effect, what it does is disrupt the markets. It has people flee to commodities, encourages speculation, and it discourages investment in things of the future. We saw the same thing in the 1970s, but I guess that's ancient history for these people.
Now, Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke says that any rise in inflation is transitory. Do you agree?
Well, life is transitory. Hello. What he's doing in terms of manipulating the interest rate market is simply another form of price controls. And we should have learned from, at least from the Romans a couple of thousand years ago, that doesn't work for very long. What he's done with his interest rate policy is subsidize government debt and discourage lending to small businesses. It's distorted the market. So again, in terms of what he's doing more harm than good. I wish he'd gone to Martha's Vineyard with the president and stayed there. Should
Ben Bernanke resign, in your view, as some say he should?
Well, if Ben Bernanke was judged on how well he's done his job, he would have resigned a long time ago. But in Washington, failure, you move upward.
Well, let's turn back to the dollar. The Congressional Budget Office has warned that the dollar will weaken gradually over the next decade and possibly lose its status as the world's reserve currency. Do you see that happening?
Well, if you continue to trash your currency and make it very plain you want it to weaken, as both our Treasury Department and Ben Bernanke are doing, yes, it will continue to lose value. The U.S. economy will remain stagnant, relatively stagnant. And but I think after 2013, you're going to see a new regime in Washington, and you're also going to see in the next 5 years something that sounds astonishing today, and that is, for the first time since the 1970s, the dollar will be relinked to gold.
Will we eventually return to the gold standard?
We will return to a gold standard. It will be a modernized version of it, but in essence, it'll be the basic principle that the dollar will remain constant with gold.
How high in price do you see gold going?
How high will the gold price go in terms of dollars? The thing to keep in mind is the real value of gold remains constant. What you see now is fears about the future. If Ben Bernanke were to announce today that the dollar would be as good as gold and he would work towards it, you might see a reduction in the gold price because there's a lot of future devaluation priced into the price of gold. People see Bernanke wants to trash it, so they don't wait for it to happen. They start hedging right away. So it's in Ben Bernanke's hands. He could send it to $18,000 an ounce. I don't think he's going to have the opportunity to do so. So in terms of investing in gold, other than using it as a small part of your portfolio as an insurance hedge, be extremely careful. this dollar weakening policy is not going to continue, certainly not after 2012.
Now, Greece is a mess. Spain and Italy seem to be in trouble. What do you think is the next shoe to drop in Europe? And what impact will the European crisis have on the U.S.?
Well, European banks are in crisis because Europe has refused to deal with the sovereign debt crisis and the fact that their banks are undercapitalized. Now, the new head of the IMF, the former French finance minister, she got in trouble by saying that banks need to be recapitalized. And the reaction of other politicians and financial officials in Europe was, "How dare you tell us the truth?" And so I think what you're going to eventually see, and it's going to happen sooner or later, is the debts of a country like Greece are going to have to be restructured. They're going to have to make very serious efforts to cut back the size of the government sector. But at the same time, and this is where European officials, our officials, IMF officials, and everybody else don't get it right, is that along with the cutbacks, you have to create an environment for growth. And the way you do that is reducing tax rates, not increasing them. People say about Greece, well, the Greeks don't pay taxes. No, they don't. So why doesn't Greece do what its neighbors have done, like Albania and Bulgaria, and enact a 10% flat tax? Very easy to collect. Make the rate low so it's not worth people's while to try to evade it.
Mr. Forbes, you are no stranger to politics. You were a Republican presidential candidate in 1996 and in 2000 as well. So real quickly, I'd love to get your thoughts on the short list of major GOP presidential candidates, lightning round, if you will, beginning with Rick Perry.
Rick Perry, governor of Texas, is now the front runner. He's had a good record, even though liberals are now trying to trash it, and perhaps some of his GOP opponents. But he did very good things in reforming their personal injury liability system, very, very positive reforms. He encouraged energy production instead of states like California to discourage it, and he refused to put in a state income tax. So in the great scheme of things, that's a pretty solid record to run on. So he is the front runner.
What about Mitt Romney?
Mitt Romney has a huge albatross. It's called Romney Care, which was a miniature version of Obamacare. Maybe they weren't twins, but they certainly were first cousins in the sense of mandating what insurers can and cannot do, putting in mandatory insurance. I don't know how Governor Romney says the federal government should do it, but it's all right for state governments to force you to do that. I think it's wrong in both places. And so that is going to, I think, eventually torpedo his candidacy.
What's your take on Michelle Bachmann?
Michelle Bachmann has demonstrated that she is a forceful advocate for good principles. The question that she has to answer now and overcome is, can she be president of the United States? There's sort of a murmur out there. Is she our Obama? You know, great in terms of leading fights for causes, but does she have the executive skills to do it? Now, that's what she has to overcome is what you might call executive credibility factor. Every candidate has something to overcome, and that's her challenge. If she does, she could win the nomination, but she has to assure people that she's not just good on policy, but she has the political skills to make things happen, as Reagan did when he became president.
What's your take on Ron Paul?
Ron Paul, I think, should be running for chairman of the Fed, because that way it would be a short-lived job, because he would radically overhaul the Federal Reserve, if not send it to the horizon, riding off in the horizon. In terms of his foreign policy, I have very serious disagreements, but in terms of monetary policy, he has it exactly right. The Fed has been trashing the dollar and has not been called to account for it.
What about Herman Cain?
Herman Cain has, in a way, the challenge that Bachmann has. Herman has, and just as fair disclosure, he was a co-chairman of my campaign, so I think Herman's a genius. Well, he was co-chairman when I ran in 2000. But he has now the challenge to persuade people that even though he has very good views and his instincts are very, very sound, can he do it in the Oval Office? And every candidate, to one degree or another, has that challenge, and that's what he's got to do with the voters. Say it's not just he's got executive experience. He was in the private sector, so he knows something about that. And he's got some very good views, and now he's got to hammer home and persuade people, okay, I can translate these skills in the Oval Office and make things happen, positive things happen.
And what is your take on former House Speaker Newt Gingrich?
Unfortunately for him, Speaker Gingrich really stumbled from the get-go, and that is going out against Paul Ryan's plan on Medicare. It's one thing to say it's a thoughtful plan, but here's where I think it could be made better. Here are my principles. But to trash it the way he did just was not the way you do things. And so he's not gained any traction yet, even though everyone recognizes he's a formidable intellect. Now, can he do what McCain did in '07? When his campaign blew up, he gradually rebuilt it on truly a shoestring. We'll see. But with so many other strong candidates out there, it's very hard to get back after you get off to a rough start.
Mr. Forbes, last question. Who of the GOP candidates is most likely going to be receiving your endorsement, and who do you think can best fix our country's problems?
Well, I'm looking over the whole field now. As you might have gathered, I'm very impressed with Governor Perry of Texas, and so that's where the winds are blowing in my little world. And so I'll be making a decision soon. Maybe one or two other candidates might come in the next couple of weeks. But I'm certainly have been impressed with what Governor Perry did. And perhaps he gets over-exuberant in his language about the Federal Reserve. But he, like Ron Paul, is right that the Fed has a lot to answer for.
All right, Mr. Steve Forbes, thank you so much for joining us here on
Thank you.
Newsmax TV.
Appreciate it.